And you realise that Saul is a person who God isn't speaking to anymore. I'm down to 1 Samuel 28. It came about in those days that the Philistines gathered their armed camps for war to fight against Israel. And Achish, now Achish, remember, is the Philistine captain. He said to David, you know assuredly that you will go out with me in the camp, you and your men. David said, very well, you shall know what your servant can do. And so Achish said to David, very well, I'll make you my bodyguard for life. Now this is a very difficult place because they're about to go out and fight as Philistines and David's on their side. Now Samuel was dead and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah in his own city, and Saul had removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists. So under verse 3 we learn that under Samuel's influence, Saul, the king, had actually removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists. And there were many of these occult people in the land because that's the whole point. God had told them they were displacing these people. And so the Philistines gathered together and came and camped in Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel together and they camped at Gilboa, which is a little bit north. When Saul saw the camp of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim, that's the dice which the priest throws, or by prophets. So verse 6 now tells you the problem. That Saul is actually wanting to hear from God what to do because he's frightened of this battle. And when he inquires, God doesn't speak. A long time ago in Aberdeen Street in the Lutheran Church, I did a series on when is it that God does not listen to you? And I gave 9 factors to it. And one of these is this, that when Saul inquires, as we've just seen from Deuteronomy 18, he then says, he says to his servants, seek for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said, there's a woman here who is a medium at Endor. In other words, the locals know, and they know very well where the occult people are. Saul, of course, has cleaned them out, but he now needs to seek for prophetic guidance. Now, this is an amazing thing, that a man of his knowledge would understand that if you go and seek false prophecy as a commitment of will, well then what you'll find is you'll get rubbish. Furthermore, you'll be detestable to the Lord because he's already made these are the things that make people detestable to him, are the people who follow these folks. So this is a very grave and difficult chapter.
Deborah, what's the difference between a medium and a spiritist?
A spiritist.
And what's the passing through fire?
Passing through fire is was where they caused you see the same thing in the Philippines today. They caused their children to walk through hot coals, or they offered them to Molech, who was the god of the Amalekites, and the children were burned on the way. And passing through fire is understood to be a place where if you walk over the hot coals and your feet don't get burned, well then somehow something is happening here. And it happens. In the Philippines today, you will see that. And you'll see it in Pacific Islands in particular. And it's and God, the Lord prohibits it because he understands that it's actually putting God to a test in terms of we can do this and we won't get burnt, and then the Spirit rides in on that, the occult spirit, and actually says, well, that just shows you my power. Whereas in fact the people have given the power by virtue of the commitment to do the job. You've always got to be careful what you've committed your will to, because that's the place where you lose the battle before the thing happens. Before you do anything, even to do it is to be caught prior, even if your feet did get burnt, because in actual fact you've committed your will. And that's the issue with all these things, and this is where Saul is actually doing it. A medium is a person who is using a spirit who occupies, in this case a woman, but it can be a man, and they speak in the name of the spirit, or rather the spirit speaks through them and takes over their mouth. A spiritist is a person who is living with the understanding that there are local spirits present, and you can, by certain means and ways, get them to communicate to you. That too is a lie.
So not dead.
No, that's right. That goes to the spirits of the dead as well. It's where necromancy is that idea. These are basic things which Jewish people would never get involved in unless they get caught up in the Kabbalistic approach, which is an occult approach that Jewish people bring to the scriptures. That's quite old, older than gypsies, so it's very old. But in this case, there's always been an occult phenomenon among Jewish people of some sort. May I say, on the left, on the right, there are Jewish people who have nothing to do with the occult phenomenon, but there is that split. And the same you will see among Christians today. Spiritist churches are essentially occult-based copies of a Christian understanding.
So when you say getting spirits to speak or communicate with you, that too is a lie. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yes, because if you, the whole thing is based upon the understanding that men and women are made by God to rule the earth. And if you turn away from wanting to follow God's prophetic voice and listening to Him, if you don't listen to Him, well then that's a commitment to listen to anything else. And there are spiritual powers that comprehend that issue, and so they know that when people stop listening to God, who know enough to know that to listen to God is wise and sensible, when people stop doing that, well then they've committed their will to the obverse, in which case they're able to be deceived by virtue of their will commitment. We've already seen this with, say, things like there are many places in the world where people believe certain things are true. Whether it's the little people for the Irish, for example, well then if you believe they're true, then you give a spirit the power to deceive your eyes by virtue of the fact that you've already committed yourself to the misunderstanding that such things are true when they're actually manifestations of falseness. So you're dealing with origin.
And so if you're committing your will to listening to other things, then is the content of that information then skewed and deceitful as well? Is that where the lie comes in?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the power of the lie is that it's given power over you because you can see things. You can actually have things present to you as if they're odd, weird. Yeah, people see things. Now, and they'll swear they'll see them, and when you look, you say, I don't. They say, well, but I saw it. And the answer is they did, but what they saw was a manifestation of something false.
And same when hearing a voice or content, that information, there's enough, what would you say, accuracy or truth in it to deceive, but behind it is a lie? Yes. Wherever you see a commitment to deceive, ventriloquism is a good example, illusionists, magicians. The problem is not with what they would harmlessly, there's no harmless stuff here, let me say, but the issue is that they set out to deceive you, and so deceiving you, if you commit your will to be deceived just for fun, well then you've already committed your will, then you will be deceived, and you will see things that are very remarkable because you committed your will to have somebody show you that. But they never tell you how they do it, although you know that they have tricky ways to do it. But the power is in the illusion. And if people come to believe those illusions, well then they move into fear and horror and difficult places.
It just escalates and builds.
It does. It does. It builds to a place where people go into deeper realms. Now, some of us have had these things experienced when we're children, and we've just listened to the voice of the Lord and heard the scriptures and said, no, not going back there. And we've asked God to forgive us for doing such things, and He's cleansed us, and we're not going back. And so we don't see them anymore. But plenty of people do. Now that's the generalised concept of committing your will to be deceived, then you will be. What God's actually saying in Deuteronomy 18 is not to do that. And that's why the issue of the will is decisive in these matters, not intelligence, cleverness, skills, whatever. None of those things are of any help to anyone. It's a matter of what you commit your will to.
It's like the Ouija boards and all that.
Same as that.
So yeah, you've got to get out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, glassy, all that sort of stuff. And you see that with a lot of our African friends who just bring in a whole host of stuff because they live in it, as do the people in New Guinea and other places. They use it.
Those have a bit of a problem with diviners, you know. We've got people divine, sort of harmless sort of people that believe they've got power over water and minerals. Now, if we're offered, these bits of wire challenged,
Yes.
we need to repent of that.
We need to understand what we're doing because what happens is you get people who are what I would call mixtures in the Christian church. They would say things like, well, God is the God of all water and findings and He can help us. So we'll really do this thing in the name of Jesus and we'll find some water. And what happens is that they are even worse because what they do is they actually mix the occult matter with the Christian matter. And so you get these places of syncretism where just things mix up and then people become confused and then they get caught into them. Yeah, there's all sorts of things like that. So, yeah, it would be better to pray and ask God to show us where the water is and even if we walked all over our property and said, speak to me when it's right, that's not a problem, is it? But so, yeah, it's the mixture that's the problem. And you've always got to be asking yourself, what is the origin of these things? Where is this coming from? That's a discernment of spirit.
So when they don't have an answer, as in what's happening here, how does this work? Oh, I don't know. It just
No, I don't know. That's right. They say I don't know, or now the most ingenuous ones say I don't know, but those who really do know, and when you get people who are deep in, you hit power then, raw power, and you just do. You walk in and hair stands up in the back of your neck. You just know. You just know. It's terrifying. And so in that respect, so there are people who are deeply in, there are people who are dabblers, there are fools on the end, and there are a general populace that accepts the idea. But there's a whole host of these superstitious things. Walking under ladders, throwing salt over your shoulder. Australians have thousands of these. Americans must have them as well. And the answer is they commit our will to think that it's very significant. 13's an unlucky number. Where is this so? What nonsense? But to commit our will to live off the fact that 13's an unlucky number, we've opened ourselves. And Australians are full of these, just chockers.
Well, you won't find a 13th floor in any building.
Exactly right, you won't.
Islands.
Yeah.
They'll be numbered so that you can't tell there's not a 13th, but there won't be a 13th
There
floor.
won't be one.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, maybe not in every single building, everywhere, ever. But
In
there's
Australia,
a lot, aren't there?
in Australia you find there's not. In other countries it's a different number, but it's considered unlucky and they don't do that. But yeah, in Australia, 13th floor is almost never there.
Okay. Well, these show commitments of will in a general populace, and when people come to listen to God and know Him, then what they usually find is they leave these things because they understand that the Lord is the Lord, and it doesn't matter if we're 13 or whether we're 12. It wouldn't fuss Him one way or the other. Neither is it significant or consequential. Once you make it a consequence, you've adopted an irrational stance. But not just simply that. If you live off it, then that's another commitment altogether. And notice the issue is not how does it come to be in our mind. The question is it sensible? The answer is, before you consider that, is don't commit your will to live off it. If you do that, then you've already decided something. Now here you find Saul knowing better, and what an astonishing thing. He so desires to hear from God that he'll actually go to the place where God has told him, you'll never hear from me that way. And then he does. So this is one of these amazing places in Scripture where God demonstrates his sovereignty. And remember, we've got to hold those three things together: the significance of man, the sovereignty of God, and the reality of, in this case, spiritual powers that are occult. Occult simply means hidden. Saul disguised himself by putting on other clothes, and he went, and the two men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, conjure up for me, please, and bring up for me whom I shall name to you. So this is the idea of bringing someone up from the dead, and this is necromancy. The woman said, behold, you know what Saul has done, and how he's cut off those who are mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you then laying a snare for my life to bring about my death? So this lady knows that she is illegal as under the king's edict, and she is attesting her client. And Saul vowed to her by the Lord, that is, he made a vow, as the Lord lives, there shall be no punishment come upon you for this thing. Now she knows if an Israelite says that, well then he won't carry it through. She said, whom shall I bring up for you? He said, I want you to bring up Samuel for me. So this now tells you two things about Saul. He is so missing Samuel, and Samuel's the only person who ever talked to him the word of the Lord, and he's the only way he knows how to get the word of the Lord is his own personal prophet. So here's the king actually misunderstanding two big issues, and our writer is selling us this clearly. He's actually saying kings are subject to prophets. They don't consult them for their own purposes. And this is the fine line that you see with all Christian matters as well. The minute you start serving the Lord, you realise that you can do it for your own good. And the minute you do that, you've inevitably changed the order of things. We cease to be servants and we become masters. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. Now, we're not told anything of how she did it. The Bible is not interested in that, nor would it be. If it was God's word, it wouldn't be interested to know that. But what we do know is that the woman is very surprised and she's very scared because she understands that this is probably a reality of a real, true sort against a deception of an untrue sort.
So did God permit it?
Eh?
Did God permit it?
He did indeed.
Oh, there you go.
Absolutely, he did.
Remember
And the
Ten
king.
Commandments?
Sorry,
Do you remember the Ten Commandments?
I do. Your point being?
So do I, but could you run them through me again?
No, not right now. I'm in the middle of this.
Sorry.
I'm staying on track.
There's I know there's an 11th.
True, Carl. When the woman saw Samuel, she said, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. Now here is an amazing thing. The woman, who is a deceiving person herself, has now found herself deceived from her perspective by truth. So this is a double thing, this text, and it's very similar to the ones we've met before. The king said to her, do not be afraid. But what do you see? The woman said, I see a divine being coming up out of the earth. So she's pretty scared. He said to her, what's its form? And she said, an old man is coming up. He's wrapped with a robe. And Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and did homage. So he believes that actually Samuel has been brought up by this woman. So he is deceived, and what he sees is what he sees. But now the text tells you something quite remarkable. Then Samuel said to Saul, so it is real. Why have you disturbed me, by bringing me up. And Saul answered, I am greatly distressed. For the Philistines are waging war against me, and God has departed from me, and answers me no more, either through prophets or by dreams. And therefore I have called you, that you may make known to me what I should do. Now, this is a really double thing, because what he's actually saying is, I would like you to advise me, and what this raises for us is an important question about people. We're to understand that the dead are actually alive. And it's really important to comprehend here that Samuel can be brought to speak in such a way that he can communicate to Saul something. And this is what he says. Why then did you ask me, since the Lord has departed from you and has become your adversary? So Samuel's saying, I don't see why you should be asking me. I'm on his side and always have been and lived my life that way. And as Saul is saying, well, he says, well, he's become your adversary. I'm not going to answer that question. The Lord has done according as he spoke through me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbour, to David. So he's referred back to an already clear, true prophetic word. So what he does is he commits Samuel to know that what has previously been said is already said. It's a bit like the way the military talk about a standing instruction. There's no need to ask us that. You know what the system, that's a standing instruction, which is, that's established. As you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his fierce wrath on Amalek, so the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Now what has he done this to? He's torn the kingdom out of his hand. Moreover, the Lord will give over Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines. And therefore tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Indeed, the Lord will give over the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. So actually he gets an answer, because his question was, what should he do? He didn't get an answer, but he has got an answer. But the answer is not what he should do, but what will be done to him. So it's now put into the passive. And he went for an active movement and discovered that he is now finding himself in a place where the judgment of God has come upon him. And what he fears here is actually going to happen. Saul immediately fell full length upon the ground and was very afraid because of the words of Samuel. And also there is no strength in him, for he had eaten no food all day and all night. So he must have fasted, and he hadn't eaten. But what's important is he's frightened out of his brain about this, because Samuel's basically said, you're going to die tomorrow. The woman came to Saul and saw that he was terrified. She said, behold, your maidservant has obeyed you, and I have taken my life in my hand, and have listened to your words which you spoke to me. Meaning, I've listened to my king, who told me to do things that he, the king, forbade, and which God also forbids. So now please listen to the voice of your maidservant. I've listened to you at high risk. She says, O king, I'd like you to listen to my voice. And let me set a piece of bread before you, that you may eat and have strength when you go on your way. But he refused. He said, I won't eat. However, his servants together with the woman urged him, and he listened to them, as he always has listened to them anyway. And so he arose from the ground and sat on the bed. The woman had a fattened calf in the house, and she quickly slaughtered it, and she took flour and kneaded it and baked unleavened bread from it. And she brought it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. Then they arose and went away that night. Now we, the readers, have got this in our hands in chapter 28 before we read chapter 29. So let's read that, and then we'll come back, because we need to understand a couple of things here. Philistines gathered together all their armies to Aphek, and while the Israelites were camping by the spring which is in Jezreel, the Lord of the Philistines were proceeding on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were proceeding on in the rear. Now we're now going back to a question. Remember that Achish had said to him, "You're with us today," and David's jammed. He just says, "Oh well, very well. You shall know what your servant can do," and that's all he said. When the commanders of the Philistines said, when he turns up in the rear with Achish, the Philistine commanders say, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" And the Achish says to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the son of servant of Saul, and the king of Israel, who has been with me in these days, and rather these years, and I found no fault in him for the day he deserted to me to this day." So Achish said, "He's bona fide, he's a good lad, he's going to do it well." And they don't believe him. They say, but the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him. And the commanders of the Philistines said, "Make the man go back, that he may return to his place where you have assigned him, and do not let him go down to the battle with us, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us. What could this man make himself acceptable? For what more could he do by doing this? Would it not be with the heads of these men? Is this not David, of whom they sung in dances and in dancing, Saul has slain thousands and David 10,000s? Well, Achish is outvoted by his mates, and he says to David, "As the Lord lives, and you have been upright, and you are going out and you are coming in with me in the army are pleasing, for I have not found evil in you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, you are not pleasing in the sight of the Lord's. So you must return and go in peace, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines." Now this is, Achish sounds to us, doesn't he, like he's a man who's an honourable dude. We know David has been quietly ripping him off, slaughtering this place and that one. So he's treated him as from our perspective, David has never changed. He has been a person who has followed in keeping the Philistines' enemies. David said to Achish, "But what have I done? And what have you found in your servant from the day when I came before you to this day, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Achish said, "I know that you're pleasing in my sight, like an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the armies of the Philistines says he must not go up with us to the battle. So you should get up early in the morning with the servants of your Lord, come with you, and as soon as you've risen in the morning and have light, depart." So David arose, he and his men, to depart in the morning, to return to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Now you need to know something here is very, very important. This excludes David from this battle where Saul will lose his life. So it's very important to understand that from the perspective of our writer, who is writing this, as we read it, we're understanding Saul's got advice from the witch, and he hasn't taken her advice actually. In fact, her advice was really good. He should eat something and he should be looked after. But what we discover is God has actually met him and just rolled over the occult powers and brought his voice. But what he doesn't bring is a new statement. Sorry?
I don't think God would have bad intentions. I think he would be a good God of love, and he would have good intentions.
It's not what it says here.
Originally, it's
There you go.
the paper they might have spoken when they wrote it on.
No,
And it was right.
no. What we're sorting is
what
no,
is reading the truth?
what
or
we're
a lie?
yes we are,
Or
and
a
what
lie
we're
asleep?
and what we're sorting is just that question. How can it be that someone could consult an occult thing against God's will, and then find that God would be faithful to him and meet him in such a way that he'll overwhelm those occult activities in the light of that? So it's actually a gracious and a good thing God's doing.
With love?
Yes, indeed, with great love for this man. But this man is disobedient at this particular time, and so he actually can't do anything else but make clear to him that it's not going to go well with him, which it doesn't. But that's how I'd understand it. So in this case, what we're looking at is when David is taken out from this battle, it happened that he goes back to Ziklag, and the Amalekites had made a raid, and they've taken captive the women and the small and the great, and they haven't killed anyone, but they've carried them off and they went their way. So David's found that all his family and children and everything are gone. And when he came to the city, it was burned with fire, and the wives and their sons and their daughters had been taken captive, and David and the people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept until there was no strength to weep. His 2 wives, Abigail and Ahinoam, are gone, and he's greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him, for all the people were embittered, each one because of his sons and his daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. In other words, here he is, and all his men and their children and their wives, their whole lock, stock and barrel in Ziklag, they've committed to him, and the Amalekites have actually turned up while they're away. Well, David does strengthen himself, and look what he does. He says to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod." And so Abiathar brought the ephod to David. He inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I pursue this band? Shall I overtake them?" And he said, "Pursue, for you shall overtake them, and you shall surely rescue all." So he went, 600 men who were with him, and came to the brook Bezor, where those left behind remained. But David pursued, and he and 400 men, for the 200 were too exhausted to cross the brook, remained behind. So they found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David and gave him bread to eat, and he provided him water and drink. And basically what he does is he asks him, "To whom do you belong and where are you from?" And he said, "Well, I'm a young man of Egypt, a servant of an Amalekite, and my master left me behind when I fell sick 3 days ago. We made a raid on the Negev of the Cherethites and on that which belongs to Judah, and in the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire." So David now knows he's found the culprits. And he said, "Will you bring me down to this band?" He said, "Well, you should swear to me by God that you won't kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will bring you down to this band." So David is now all he's got. He's about to turn and dob in his master. And when he brought him down, they were spread all over the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil that they had taken from the Lord of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David slaughtered them from the twilight until the evening of the next day. Not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. That tells you 2 things. I think first it tells you that they're running, but further, they're too exhausted from slaughtering all day to actually pursue them. Anyway, he's not interested in pursuing them because he will overtake them and shall rescue all. So God's word to him is, pursue, you will overtake, and you will rescue. So once he's got a rescue operation running, he doesn't go further. He recovered all the Amalekites had taken, rescued his 2 wives, but nothing of theirs was missing, small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything. David brought it all back. And so he captured all the sheep and cattle which the people drove ahead of the other livestock. They said, "This is David's spoil." When he came to the 200 men who were too exhausted to follow, who had been left at the brook Bezor, they went out to meet David and meet the people with him, and he approached the people and greeted them. All the wicked and worthless men among those who had went with David said, "They didn't go with us. We will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart." David said, "You must not do so, my brothers. With what the Lord has given us, who has kept us and delivered into our hands, and the band that came against us? And who will listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down to the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike." And our writer says, "And so it has been from this day forward, that he made it a statute and an ordinance of Israel to this day." This now tells you that David is actually saying there is a solidarity with us as God's people, and we don't reward the executors of the operation, in this case the men who fought. We actually go together. When David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah and to his friends, saying, "Behold," he says, "a gift to you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. For those who were in Bethel, and those who were in Ramoth of the Negev, and to those who were in Jatir, and to those who were in Arior, and to those in Shifmoth, and those who were in Eshtemoa, and to those who were in Rachal, and to those who were in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, and those who were in the cities of the Kenites, and to those who were in Hormah. What's he done? He's actually distributed the spoil to the locals. And he's brought back either what's theirs already but has been taken, or
Giving them extra.
given them extra about what they haven't received. Now we finish 1 Samuel tonight with this astonishing chapter, which you must remember because the next chapter appears to contradict it, but does not, I think. The Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. You appreciate there are more sons of Saul than Jonathan. The battle went heavily against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Now this opens an important problem that the Philistines bring to the local Hebrews, is that they have got not only superb weapons, but they've got long-range longbows, rather as the British used to do in the early sections of what you would call Robin Hood days. I've just forgotten the King Arthur. So what would it be? I don't know, 1200. Yeah, so the longbow has a great range, and it's just fired into the air in massive, massive volleys. And so they fire them into the air, and of course you can't see the archers. All you notice is that you're busy about fighting your man, and an arrow drops out of the sky at you. So it's a very difficult problem. The battle went there. He said to his armour-bearer, "Draw your sword and pierce me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and pierce me through and make sport of me." But his armour-bearer would not. He was greatly afraid. So Saul took his sword and fell on it. So this is a suicide in the sense that he kills himself because he sees he's done. When his armour-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. And thus Saul died with his 3 sons, his armour-bearer, and all his men on that day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley with those who were beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled, so this half the army hasn't engaged you, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the cities and fled, and then the Philistines came and lived in them. It came about on the next day when the Philistines came to strip the slain that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his weapons and sent them through the land of the Philistines to call out the good news to the houses of their idols and the people. And they put his weapons in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to a wall at Bethshan. Now when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul's body, all the valiant men arose, walked all night, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. This action of the people of Jabesh Gilead is well rewarded by David, who commends them for this work. Now tonight we're opening. How are we going for time? What we've noticed is that we're moving through Philistines gathering, the Endor thing. The Philistines have got David on board. He goes back, recaptures and makes essentially a rescue of his own people. So it's a redemption of where he's going. And then finally Saul dies with his 3 sons on 1 Samuel. Now we should notice that 1 Samuel 31 is paralleled by 1 Chronicles 10. 1 Chronicles 10, 1 to 12. Same data, but different writer and a different annal. And much abbreviated. But you'll notice it's of the same text pretty much as Saul died with his 3 sons, and those of his house died together. And the Philistines strip the dead and send their armour into the house of their gods and the house of Dagon their god, and Jabesh Gilead heard it. So 1 Chronicles 10 is pretty much, but look at the comment at the end of 1 Chronicles 10. So Saul died for his trespass which he committed against the Lord, because the word of the Lord which he did not keep, and also because he asked counsel of a medium, making inquiry of it, and did not inquire of the Lord. And therefore he killed him, and turned the kingdom to David the son of Jesse. Your chronicler has made a judgment, has he not? And his judgment is that this is the reason why God suffered him to die. What we know is he did ask of the Lord and didn't get an answer. So you have to be very careful as you read the chronicler, because he is writing from quite a different perspective, and he gives short summaries and fairly quick moral judgments about some things, of which 1 Samuel gives you a much more, what would you say, fuller account, and has prepared you, the reader, for the whole story, because 1 Chronicles is very short. And by chapter 11, he's now going to give you a list of David's mighty men. The chronicler is into lists because he sees lists as very important ways to understand how the history of Israel is affected by these great people who in actual fact had part to play. 1 and 2 Samuel are doing quite a different thing. They're teaching us about 2 men who are accepted and rejected in this context. Got any questions about this section before we just move on?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question about the that witch of Endor, and when God permitted. You did say there, David, that we are dead but we're alive.
Yes, Samuel, there's a place later under David's rule. You remember he commits an adultery with Bathsheba and the child dies. But David thinks that he can change God's mind about this, and he fasts and prays. But his servants come and tell him, no, the child's dead, it's gone. And they think he's going to go into a morose wally and just have a fit. And he gets up and says, well, there you go. I set out to ask God, he has answered me. And then he makes this astonishing comment. He will not come to me, but I will go to him. So that he understands that in death there is a reunion that takes place with this infant son, I guess. And he has a concept of Sheol, as we see it in the Psalms, where the place of the dead is seen to be a place that is very much alive. In the teaching of Jesus, do you remember that they teach him, or they speak to him about how Abram died and Jacob died and all these people died, and how can you say that you were there before them, or they lived, they rejoiced to see your day? And he said, well, you err insofar you don't know the scriptures, but you also err in the fact that God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. In other words, if anybody is with God, they're never dead. They're all alive. So in this respect, he's saying, if you go to be with God, then by definition, you are alive, because he's the God of the living, not of the dead. In this context, Samuel is alive and can be brought up, meaning from the dead, from the perspective of those who are still upon the earth, but from the perspective of the fact that he can speak the word of God as a standing instruction. He adds nothing to it as to substance, except that he says, you will join me tomorrow. You will be with me. So in this sense, I'm saying that there are lots of expressions you have in the Old Testament and certainly in the New, because once we get to the Christian view of these things, well then Paul will speak about those who are asleep in Christ, who rise. And Jesus will speak of Lazarus, who is quite clearly dead, but sleeps to be awakened again, so that understanding is there. So I brought that implication to the fact that if Samuel, my reason for saying this is, the witch does not bring up Samuel as an apparition. What God does is brings up a man who is alive, bracket, though dead, close bracket, and he can speak for God. Although he doesn't, he simply says, you've got it all already, there's nothing more to add, except that you're going to die tomorrow. Now maybe the chronicler read that to be, because you called up the witch. But it's not what Samuel says actually, I don't think. That's what I meant. Now if that were not the case, you can immediately see what happens. What the occult does is that it trades upon ignorance. It says, well, it's all a very great mystery, this dead stuff. You just can't be sure of anything. Once you die, that's that. Who knows what's happening out there, wherever that is. And so in this, in this case, what we're actually seeing is that there is a very clear understanding that the dead are alive, and they too are in touch with the purposes of God. And therefore we say that God allowed him. And the woman bears witness to that, because she understands she hasn't seen an apparition. She's seen a reality. Yeah. So she's been trumped. God's truth has trumped her occult game. And in this respect, she actually has understood and is astonishingly compassionate towards Saul, who she knows has just got a death sentence tomorrow. So that's what I meant.
So that mediums normally bring up an apparition, would they?
Yes, yes.
So,
yes, that's right.
whereas this time that's what she
Yeah.
So when you
The
say,
same thing happens with people who attend seances. You'll never find that they actually deal with a person. They actually deal with a spirit that has always observed the person.
Okay, because that's what I'm trying to align there when you were saying that, because that was the question I was going to ask, is that when people are speaking to people that have died, when you said we are dead but we're alive, are they actually speaking to a live spirit or a deceptive spirit of that person?
Yes, in the context of this particular necromancy, they're dealing with a deceptive spirit that is mimicking the dead person.
Okay.
And that was true in the case of Samuel.
No,
that's
because in the
God
case,
permitted it.
Yes, in the case of Samuel, God trumps the occult activity.
By bringing the real man.
Yes, that's right. So he actually overwhelms Saul's will to be deceived. Otherwise, God has deceived him, which is not the case.
Yes.
And we, the readers, have had a whole 5, 10, 13 chapters to get ready for this. We understand Samuel's relation to Saul, and that's why you've got to know the history. You can't read this in the light of nothing. You've got to have history to get it. But yes, that's happening. And so if people go to seances, for example, they will actually ask to bring up I want to talk to Uncle Charlie.
Yep.
And then some spirit will speak through some other person usually, or in some indirect way by moving a glass or some such thing. And they'll always have something which is accurate to life. That his favourite pipe was in his mouth. First says, it's Uncle Charlie. Now that's arisen because a spirit has seen Uncle Charlie's pipe and his cardigan and his funny left ear, right? And all they do is recall. And therefore they masquerade. And the person, of course, is so committed. Usually, if persons talk to the dead after someone has died, they're very distraught people who are so missing the person that they definitely want it. They want any communication again. Well, they get one, but it's not the voice of the person, it's the voice. But it's always got some data which is checkable, verifiable, and therefore deceptive. Always. And that's why when people say, but it's true, the answer is, I know what you mean. There is a true data, but there is an actual fact, an incorrect and ungodly setting which makes it false. Falsity has two ideas. There's a data which is false, and there is an occasion which is false. You see the same thing, for example, in pornography would be a good example, where you see, if you learn your sex in the gutter, you'll learn true data, you'll learn accurate data, but you won't learn the truth about sex. You need another setting for that. So that it's this, and that's what it is. It's taking a lovely thing and putting it into a disgusting setting, which in this way may maintain its data, but actually undoes the truth, the moral truth, or the spiritual truth of a matter. You can only know the spiritual truth of a matter by committing your will to what is true. Remember how Paul says that in Philippians 4:8. Whatsoever is true, godly, and of good report, think on these things. Actively think on them. So that's quite. So you've just got to be careful in your own mind when you talk to people of an occult base, because they'll often speak accurate data, and sex learned in the gutter will have some accurate data, but it won't have the truth of sex. You've got to find that in another setting of love and commitment, and covenantal relationship, and exclusive bed, and a whole lot of stuff.
I know a good idea about a bed. If you slip on your head.
Sorry?
If you've got a sore back, you lay on your bed and put pillows under it.
You can. It often helps.
And lean backwards. Yeah. So that's for these sticks in the gutter. They could have slipped on their head. Maybe fell into the concrete. I don't know.
Can be.
From my point of view, it didn't look very nice. I don't know, seeing girls in the malls.
Hang on. Other questions?
How should we view like Saul taking his life? As in, is that an illustration of when you start committing your will to the dark side, that it just escalates and then you resort to those sorts of actions?
Well, he's a bit stuck now, see, because he set out to ask God's mind about the battle because he was frightened, didn't get an answer, sought one, did get it. God did close with him, but not in the way he thought, so that he didn't have a prophetic, this is what will happen answer, except insofar that he would die. So when he sees the battle is gone against him, and an archer has pierced his armour, and he knows his life's slipping away, what he does, I think, is, well, he gives his reason. His reason is that if they take him alive, it'll be a long and slow and difficult death. And he just simply says, well, let's do this quick. But his armour bearer won't touch him, because he knows about the anointed of the Lord. And so I think it's an expediency, really.
As opposed to the product of his commitments of, well, he actually understands the prophecy.
Yeah. It's a bit like as sometimes you see and read about the nurses who operate with Médecins Sans Frontières. They have a suicide pill because they know, particularly in Africa, Northern Africa, that people come in to be serviced, to be cared for, then they get better and disappear and bring back their mates. And since rape is it's a form of warfare now, all those nurses have a way out fast. It's a major issue, that, which if that wasn't there, I'd say some more about, but not today. Not today. So,
David, who was David fighting before all this was happening? He was fighting the Amalekites, was he? He kept going on for little sorties,
Yes.
having
Yes.
a go at the Amalekites, not the Philistines, the Amalekites.
In the southern part of the Negev.
Right.
Do you mean? Yes. Yes. So when they've gone north, when they've gone north here, he's operating down here at Ziklag, and when they've gone north to Mount Gilboa, Ziklag's been taken, and then they've journeyed to the Negev south.
And before that again.
Before that, yes, he's dealing with people in this area, and he's got a base here.
And they're all Amalekites, aren't they?
Well, there are Amalekites among them, but these are mainly Philistines in this side.
And he was battling Philistines.
Well, yes, because when he went to Achish, do you remember Achish said, well, you're a good lad, you can have this city, Ziklag. And David says, thank you very much, and puts his base at Ziklag, but then takes out tiny places that never...
These are Philistine places.
Some of them were.
What does Achish think of that?
He thinks he's a great chap.
You didn't know about it. He killed everybody so they couldn't tell.
The lords of the Philistines are much smarter than Achish. They've got a longer view. No, Achish is, if not deceived, well, he is, he's deceived, but he's deceived by, he thinks he's got a top prize here, and he knows he's got an able operator.
Yeah.